going. Yay.
Yay.
Thank you, Anthony, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here having a chat.
I'm really excited to hear a bit about your story, what you do and why you do it. So people have heard your intro. Can you tell us what inspired you to adopt a literacy-based learning approach for your family? Or maybe you could actually tell your story personally. Maybe that would be even nicer than hearing like the official version. Tell us a bit about you that's not like in the bio.
We always wanted to homeschool our kids, at least for those first few years. I think I didn't know any homeschoolers at all, apart from one family, which pretty much were the cliched, stereotypical, if you ask someone who didn't really know homeschoolers what homeschoolers were like, that's the family that I kind of knew, very insular and protecting their children from everything and only using, they're not socializing with outside groups. And so it was quite scary thinking about homeschooling our kids, but I'd seen all the TED Talks from like Ken Robinson and other people like that talking about education and what our children are going to need moving into the future. And I just wanted to be able to nurture that individuality and that creativity that our kids had, at least for those first few years before sending them off to school. I got a huge amount of respect for teachers, but having 30 different munchkins at different levels of development, it's difficult enough just having my children. So I don't envy the job that they're trying to do. And so I just wanted to nurture my kids for the first couple of years. And I was blessed that I had the time to research different forms of home education. So I did all these online quizzes of what type of homeschooler are you? And I didn't recognize any of the different things that were options. But when I answered them, they came up that I would probably like a Charlotte Mason living book style of education, which caused me to delve into exactly what that was because I had no idea. And it really resonated with me that using books to reinforce learning. I'd actually had a head injury in year 11 and developed a lot of memory issues from that. And I found that the few things that I did really remember well were usually wrapped in a story. If there was that narrative and it made me feel, then I could usually remember it a lot better. And so I started doing a bit more research and found a lot of statistics that backed that up. There was a professor at Stanford, I believe it was, got his students to give 1-minute talks on nonviolent crime. And 90% of the students just gave statistics. And the other 10% gave a narrative type based, wrapped all the statistics in their narrative. And they found that around 65, 70% of the people remembered what was told in the narrative, but only 10% what was told when it was just statistics being thrown out. And the London School of Business did a similar study and came up with the same results. The ability to have information cement in your mind is so much greater when it's tied into a narrative. And so I thought, what a great way to teach my kids, because they'll remember it better. It's more fun and they get to read great books. We can curl up on the lounge together and read stories, or I can be quite low energy at times. And when it's difficult to be doing some things with the kids, they can come and lie on the bed with me and we can read a book together. And I don't need to feel that I'm failing them in their education. Mm-hmm. So for me, I just fell in love with that idea of using wonderful books to convey what I wanted my kids to learn. And I think the other style was I hated a lot of school because I didn't understand the point. And I think now that I'm older, I get some of the points. But with history, I want my kids to remember these dates and times and things that don't really have that much relevance? Or did I want them to understand the effects of war and the human things that triggered these wars to happen and the consequences paid by people for these wars happening, and understand that big picture in real terms? And for me, that's something that you can get so much better from a book, and that can affect my kids' lives and how they relate to other people and give them a bit more empathy and understanding rather than just having to memorize facts. So I think they were the main things that made me fall in love with the idea of using living books as their sort of core of my kids' education.
What is a living book, Anthony?
So a living book is a term that's grown out of the Charlotte Mason movement and gets thrown around a lot. For me, it's a story that, rather than just getting across the facts, wraps them up into a rich storyline. And so it can make all of these, it's sort of the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down and wraps all of the things that you're trying to learn within a well-written narrative that makes it relevant and relatable to us. They're usually written by an author who's really knowledgeable and really passionate about the subject, and they're just excited to help and narrate this knowledge to other people.
Kind of like the timeless books, right?
That's it. They're sort of timeless classics that will always have something that we can learn from them and make that information easily relatable.
Yeah.
The other word you'll often hear thrown around, just if you start to get into some living book circles, is the word twaddle, which is sort of the, if you think of a living book as your meat and potatoes and that stuff that'll nourish your brain and help it to grow and you to learn, twaddle's your ice cream and your fairy floss that you might have afterwards. Just those really easy, nothing
like
that's substantial.
Like I'm coming to mind the Wimpy Kid books my son is obsessed with, and I'm like, I really don't think that's classified as a living book.
Although, for me, I mean, everything you do in your kids' education, I think you need to know why and what the purpose of it is. There's no point reading any book for your kids' school if you don't have a purpose to it. And for me, my oldest son's dyslexic. He always loved stories and could tell back what had happened in the stories really well. But he couldn't read them for himself because he had so much trouble with the letters moving around, and he just didn't have the confidence because of those troubles. The ridiculous whatever story treehouse books he fell in love with and devoured all of those. And it just gave him that practice that he needed to have the confidence to read bigger books. And so they were a fantastic tool in our homeschool, and so I'm not going to knock anybody for the twaddle. I mean,
totally. I think everything has it. Yeah, everything. I think it's like eating, right? Everything, a little bit of everything is great, and if that's what keeps my son in bed from 6 a.m. and not waking up the house, then like heck yes, thank you very much.
That's it, exactly. There's a wonderful purpose to it, and don't listen to what anybody who says slamming it, because it's working well for you and what you're trying to achieve.
The way that I know that they're doing okay book-wise is when they come out with different vocab, and I'm like, okay, good. I'm happy because you're using like words that I wouldn't even use. So I figure it must be working.
Yeah. My oldest is now 14, and sometimes when he'll say something, he never uses a pretentious word that's big for the sake of being big, but sometimes he'll just have the perfect nuance to a word. And I'm like, oh, dude, that was amazing. I wouldn't have thought to say that maybe, but it just perfectly summed up what you were trying to get across. And it feels good that that's working.
I know. Doesn't it like validation as a parent? You're like, oh, yes, tick, gold star.
Exactly.
And we need them because there's like not every day's fun.
That's it. And those times late at night when you're like, is this all a fail? You're like, am I harming my children? And then you get those wins. You're like, no, this is we're achieving what we're trying to achieve, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and trade-offs for everything, right? I think I've come to the recognition that like actually there's no perfect option, and for each one there's a trade-off, and I am choosing this one. And that's
I think we make the least bad choice a lot of the time. There's nothing perfect, so we're trying to pick one of the least negatives. And
completely, I agree. So do you still homeschool? Because you said that we are only planning to homeschool for a few years.
So we were only planning to do it for the first few years, and then in the Charlotte Mason Living Bookshop world, they recommend not starting kids before 6 because they're just not quite ready. So, play outside and read picture books and do whatever else, but don't push the formal learning until 6. And so as my second child was coming up to 6, I was really excited to start schooling them together for a lot of things. And then by 15 minutes into the first day, it was very obvious that it was not going to work. My kids, I love them all so much, but they are so different. For 3 boys who came from exactly the same place and have had the same influences, the differences between them is astounding. And so where my oldest had trouble reading because of his dyslexia, but loved stories, my second child could read really easily. He just understood that this phoneme makes this sound and could put that together. But we were sort of near the end of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as I was reading it to them all at night, and I got, Dad, who's Charlie? Like he's kind of the core character here, but he'd just been lying there listening along, but he's got really bad verbal comprehension issues. And so he was really struggling to follow actually what was happening. So I've had to school him very differently. And that's where I feel it's so valuable to know what the purpose of a book is. Because with him or any other thing that you're using in your school, because for him, it just wasn't working. So I had to find something a lot simpler sometimes. Maybe it had to have a lot more pictures. So he had things to tie the knowledge to a lot more because he's so visual. And so we had to find slightly different things for him and school those two separately. But then we found out that he's got level 2 autism he's been diagnosed with. And just going to school would be quite a lot of an ask for him. And so and the kids wanted to stay homeschooling. And I think he would have had to be homeschooled as well for him to thrive as much as he can. Yeah. And so we've kept going and loved it.
So great that you can do that for your kids when they need it.
It's wonderful, yeah. Being able to cater their education to who they are.
Yeah.
And what they need.
So tell us about that. That gives us a little bit of an insight into like the structure, because clearly it's not all in one place. So what does that look like? What's the typical structure of a day or a week at your place?
At our place, okay. We're working on getting more of a structure. We also operate a farm, and so when when different things are happening on the farm, the normal schedule can go out the window a little bit. With my oldest, we are trying to work with him on what he needs to do. So at the start of the year, we'll look at the outcomes that he has to hit and the subjects he's wanting to do, and we'll help him choose the resources. And then we'll look at how much he has to average per week to accomplish all of that. Because that's something I really struggled with. And I'd much rather him fail and fall flat on his face now while the consequences are so minimal than when he's out of home and at university and trying to work out how to set those goals and juggle all of that. So he knows what he should be trying to accomplish each day. And then he keeps a record and does that. And then every month we try to check in and have a look and see if he actually did it all for that month, or whether he needs to add an extra thing each day coming up. So with him, we don't have like a start at 9 o'clock or any of that type of structure. He's a teenager. So some days, some weeks he'll be getting up at 6 o'clock and feeling good. And then other times he'll be sleeping until 9:30. It just
practically an adult at 14 now, right?
Oh, it's crazy. He's 17 months between our two oldest, but the oldest is, I think, like a lot of kids coming into COVID, they hit puberty and matured a lot earlier. And so there's sort of 3 or 4 years physically between him and his slightly younger brother. It's amazing. So yeah, we're trying to get him just to be able to do that kind of thing. With the younger two, we try to have a bit more of a schedule and tell them exactly what they should be reading each day. And we're just gradually giving them a little bit more ownership of their education so they can also start to build those skills themselves.
Yeah. So you've got 14. What are the other ages?
14, 13, and 11.
Okay.
So 3 boys, which keeps life interesting. Yes.
I think 11's like the less of like the whole fully crazy energy part, right? Or am I like
you would
it's
hope
not like
so.
Bounding around the house? Oh no, we're still bounding around the house.
He is extremely ADHD, so he is always bounding around the house and bouncing off things, and it's wonderful. His energy is brilliant. I love it.
It's fun. It's fun.
It is, exactly. Life is never dull, that's for sure.
Yeah, a farm, 3 boys, and homeschooling. Yeah, I can kind of imagine that life is not being dull in that house.
We've got a house lamb and a house goat at the moment. One of them was dropped off at our place, and the other the mum rejected. And so we've always.
I just don't think I have space in my brain for animals, Anthony. It's like the kids I'm like, I can't even.
To be honest, my wife looks after most of that because it is absolutely too much for my brain. And like, I can't handle this. This is yours.
Yeah. Someone's like told me the other day they were even just getting a puppy, and I was like, I just can't even open myself up to the possibility. Like, I'm tapped out. No, thank you. So you said that you help your kids choose their resources. How do you do that, Anthony? Where do we even start? Because every one of us is so different. The kids are different. The reviews online are like, it's amazing, it's terrible. Like, it's
and sometimes
talk to
they'll
me
be from
about
the
your
same person a
approach.
year apart, those two reviews.
Probably. So how do
Oh.
you approach it? And I know there's, again, like no perfect answer for this and everyone's going to be different,
Absolutely.
but I'd love your insight on how you choose them.
So there's a lot of people that have put together book lists for living book education. There's one in America, Ambleside Online, that is completely free to get their book list and all their resources, and they've got 25,000 members in their Facebook group or something if you have questions. And so we use that as our spine. There's some Australian mothers who've done a great job of Australianizing it and substituting books that are more relevant to us here. And so I'll usually use that as my spine and then jump off from there, looking at different living book lists to fill whatever needs I'm having. Sometimes a book may not have exactly what I'm looking to get across to my kids with it. It's good there. Because a lot of the homeschool crowd in America, where these things come from, are often very Christian. A lot of the curriculums have quite a Christian slant. But there's now some Muslim Charlotte Mason book lists put together, quite a few secular book lists. So depending on what you're looking for that suits exactly your needs, you can often find someone who's substituted different books here and there, which I find is great. There's also some wonderful Facebook groups looking at expanding the Anglo-centric nature of a lot of these curriculums. And so they're recommending living books from all different cultures, and I find that a fantastic resource as well.
Fun.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love learning about these different things because especially growing up where my kids they start to think that their life is normal. And it's very nice to be reminded that we all have such different lives and nobody else's normal is the same as our normal. And just to get that humility and understanding that there's different perspectives and how much we can learn from all of those different perspectives. So I think it's great being able to give them stories from other cultures and they benefit a lot from it.
Yeah, totally. I can definitely see how that is. So Living Book Press, tell me about Living Book Press.
So when we were first starting to homeschool, I was lucky that we had those years knowing what I wanted to do. So I had the book lists and was trying to track down these books that were recommended. Because when you're starting, it's very hard to have the confidence to go and switch from what someone else has suggested and said works. And so I felt, well, I need to make sure I find this book that has been suggested. And as I would ask on different homeschool groups, people could tell exactly what curriculum I was using by what I was asking, since so many people ask for those books. They're so difficult to find. And there were some that I still, 7 years later, have never seen a secondhand copy of come up. Other ones were $300 when it was available, and I just couldn't afford that. I remember there was The Wonderland of Nature by Nuri Mas is a fantastic Australian nature study book. And it was $60 to get it shipped from the lady who was printing it, and there was no way we could afford that. We were living very cheaply at the time, and that would have been a couple of months of leftover income to save up for a book. We just couldn't justify it. But I've been talking to my wife about, we'll have to work out what we can do. And we went into a Salvation Army op shop that afternoon. There was an old hardcover copy there, and I was squealing and jumping up and down. I was so excited, like $2 for this book. I had literally half an hour before said we, had to work out how we could buy it for $60. And I realized what a barrier to entry it was for people not being able to easily get these resources. So many posts online were, what's a good copy of this, or where can I find an affordable copy of that? And so just to try and pay forward the help I was getting, I tracked down the rights holders for a couple of these books and made them available. I was never planning to start a business. I just wanted to make those books a bit easier to find. But then I had different curricula come to me and say, hey, that's great that you made these available. Can you do these ones also? Or any chance you could do this? Or people would come up to me and send me a note saying, please, I can't find an affordable copy of something else. And I just fell into publishing. So now I've got 400 and something books out and a few hundred more on the way. And I just keep trying to make it easier for people to use these living book educations.
So good. I love it because that you found a need and you're really supporting people who are trying to support their children. Do you know what I mean? Like the ripple effect of that's really massive. So thank you from all of us.
You're welcome. It's lovely. I love getting, and every week I'd get a message from a mum somewhere just saying, hey, thank you so much. I'd given up hope of finding this book, and it's nice. I'll do things, especially if there's a curriculum that my boys are following that breaks the books up. I'll stick little icons in the paragraphs so that people know where to stop and for each week. And if I can save each mum half an hour that schedules that book, that's hundreds of hours a year that I'm saving that they can spend with their kids, or they can do other things, because I know how much everybody's juggling so much, especially when you're homeschooling. So I just try to do those little things to make life simpler.
Yeah. And you get income. Like isn't that beautiful business, right? Like it's like win-win, like everybody wins. And that's why I love business so much. It's like, you get what you need for your family. We got what I need from our family. Like it makes me happy.
Absolutely. I'm having to go through the mindset switch though now at the moment, where I've always been in the supply business. People are already looking for this stuff. And so, you can, if you can't find it secondhand and you're needing to use it, you can come to me. But now I'm starting to find other great books that might not be recommended on curriculums. And like, this is fantastic. Everybody should read this. And I'm having to switch into the selling rather than just the supplying, which is a very different mindset to hold.
It is. Yes, we can talk about that offline. Okay, tell me, how do you in your family structure the balance with like the more organic interest-led learning, or just even learning on the farm and being on the farm, or like I think a lot of people feel like we were talking about, I can't remember if it was offline or not, but like, are we doing enough? Is this okay? Are they learning? That whole questioning, like, is it enough structure? What if I don't actually really want to do structure? Like, how do you do it in your homeschool?
I think the key for me here is knowing why you're homeschooling and what your goal is. Because if you don't have that defined, then you'll look at what somebody else is doing and your kids aren't doing that. And so you'll always feel behind. Whereas if you have a particular goal or something in mind that you want to see in your children from their education, that's the benchmark that you can actually measure against. You need something that you can measure it against. For us, I want my kids to be learners. I want them to be questioning things and loving the journey that is learning. And so I realize I'm failing if my kids I don't know how to do that. Like, well, that's not the mindset I'm trying to give you. So if my kids are things and jumping on YouTube to find a video to learn about it, or jumping on the internet and doing some research, or finding a book that they can read about it, I'm like, fantastic. That's what I'm wanting to nurture. Most of our kids are going to have jobs that don't exist currently. With the rise of AI and everything, everything's changing so quickly that the ability to be a motivated learner and to seek out the information you're needing to accomplish whatever you're trying to do, as well as to work with other people, I think are two key skills that will survive no matter what, are going to be needed no matter what's happening with AI and everything else. And so for me, how I know that it's kind of working, so to speak, is when I see my kid start a business selling dice and says, okay, I'm going to need it to learn how to do 3D computer-aided design and sculpt this stuff. So we'll research what he needs to do, what programs he needs to learn. And then he'll research 3D printers so that he can work out what he'll need to be able to do that, and then how to make a resin mold out of silicon. And seeing him do all that researching and finding those resources to accomplish the goal that he's set for himself, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm trying to nurture with him. And the thing I love about a Charlotte Mason education is they talk about the riches and these other things. So I try to give boys have it so they can be finished easily by lunchtime. A couple of hours of those book things to cover all their maths and English and whatever subjects there are. And then they've got the afternoon and the rest of the day to explore whatever it is that they're passionate about. And if we can introduce them to different styles of art and different types of music and all those other things, and it doesn't have to be in a school type way. Sometimes I'll just have the Chromecast on and different artists' work flashing around on the TV, and the kids will just get interested in different styles or start comparing them, or they'll just start noticing those things, and that'll send them down a journey of the things that they've connected to that and are passionate about. Because you never know what's going to stick and it's going to be passionate for your kids. My oldest was cleaning his room a couple of months ago and had an ant farm that he'd been given years ago and never got around to. So he just stuck it out on the table to see if his brothers wanted it before we gave it away. And his younger brother is obsessed now with ants. Just from that, he's now been out every day with a black light at night, like over the top of a white towel, so that the queen ants will come after their nuptial flights. And then he's telling me he's got 10 different types of queen ants that are laying eggs, and his first larvae just came out the other day, and he's building outworlds for them.
Oh my gosh, so, you're an ant farmer now as well.
Oh, absolutely. And so you never know where those passions are going to come from that is going to ignite something in your kids. So just by being conscious of trying to expose them to all different types of art and crafts and whatever else, gives them those opportunities to see what's going to hit. Because I don't want to force what I love on my kids. That's what I like. I want them to find their things that nurture them and resonate with them.
Yeah. And then we learn, right?
Exactly. I mean, I'm learning so much about ants. He'll bring it to me and say, you can see by the abdomen being this size that it's this type of ant and she's going to be laying babies, and this one doesn't need to have any food until it's actually got some worker ants that have hatched and will look after it. He'll go through so much stuff. It's fascinating.
Isn't it funny how much sponges they are? My daughter found a budgie book at an op shop, like on raising budgies. And like I said, I don't want pets, but she memorized this thing. And then there's a hatchling and then this, and you're like, what? Start like, okay, great, amazing.
Exactly.
We've never had a budgie. I don't plan on having budgie. Like,
yep.
But she's anyway. It's
but they get that.
It's fun to see what they get excited about. It's really fun.
It is, and I much prefer that, like, than them talking about the latest thing they've tried to create in Minecraft, which I do appreciate sometimes when they show me a contraption they've made. But when they're learning about these other more real things and they're so passionate and telling me, I don't have as difficult a time sharing that excitement.
Yes, I'm with you. Yeah. So tell me, when you read a book, like say you have looked at the curriculum, you've chosen something that has to do with some historical event, and so you're reading some books around that. How do you then draw that out into a lesson? Or do you do that? Or do you just talk about it and like it's really informal?
I keep it pretty informal. One thing I love about a Charlotte Mason style of education is at the end of each term, they'll often suggest that you ask questions of the kids. But rather than being things like, what was the date that Sydney Cove was settled, it'll be, tell me what you can about the settlement of Sydney Cove. And your child will tell you all the things that they can remember about the journey of the fleet coming across and all of that kind of thing, and what it was like when they did it. And so you can actually see what they've taken in rather than trying to trip them up on something that they may have forgotten. So as we read
for 2 weeks.
That's it, and then it's gone. I mean, we all remember studying for the test, and by the time you've walked out of there, your brain's already forgetting it because it doesn't need to remember it anymore. So as I read to them, they narrate what has been read. So when they're first starting out, it'll be every couple of paragraphs often. Every idea, as you're reading, as soon as you'll get the sort of the ideas that are structured together to build the story or whatever else is happening. So each idea I'll stop and just say, hey, what can you tell me about that? And they'll tell it back to me in their own words. And this forces them to, as they're listening, pass the information for what's important. And then they take it in. And in that act of rewriting it themselves, they're reinforcing what they've learned. So then as they get better at it, it'll be each chapter. I'll be like, hey, just tell me about that chapter. And they'll tell it back. And then as they get more fluent with that and they get a bit older, it might say they're reading a story of someone on the first fleet coming across. Or we say, hey, write a letter back to someone back home pretending you're that person. So then they're describing the sights and the sounds and being homesick or whatever else. And you can sort of start to shake it up and incorporate them learning to write and do all that sort of thing from within it as well. So I find just by asking them to narrate regularly and just have a casual conversation about it, they seem to reinforce a lot of them.
So narrate is writing it out.
Even just telling it back to me.
Okay.
So what he does when he comes and tells me about his ants and all the fascinating different things, that's him kind of narrating what he's learned with his ants.
Got it.
So I'll be like, hey, so what did you get from this? What have you learned from that? There's a book that I really love called Gregor Mendel, The Friar Who Planted Peas. And it's like a 40-page book. But it's about a friar back hundreds of years ago who was trying to work out genetics. He came from a farming community and would see, some sheep had curly hair, some sheep had straight hair. And so he became a friar so that he could study a lot, because that was one of the only places where they had the big libraries with lots of books and the like. And he got peas. And some of them were green peas, some were yellow, some were wrinkly, some were smooth. And he would hand pollinate them, cross-pollinating and taking meticulous notes and tie like some fabric around it so nothing else would pollinate it. And he learned about how there's the different genetics from each parent that come together, and recessive genes and dominant genes. And this was all forgotten. He was way too ahead of all the other scientists at the time. And it was almost 100 years until his research was rediscovered and people were starting to build this foundation again on their own, that he was really appreciated for what he'd learned. But my kids, we read that with them, and then they could tell me back so much of it. And then they're linking it to, well, we've got the white ewe that was mated with the white ram, and her kids were both white. But then that kid who was also with a white ram had a black baby, pure black. So that must be the gene from great-grandfather or whatever. They start to put it into the real things that they're seeing on the farm, or other stuff like that. And so I love just seeing how a book that we read a year before is still in their mind because they've told it back and understood what's going on, and then being related to what they're seeing in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. It is, you can make it real. Like, it's already real because it's a story, but then they can actually apply it. That's super
exactly
cool.
They can go on that journey of discovery as well, and see examples of people learning and testing and failing, and how failure is just a step on the way to discovering whatever it is that you're trying to do. And
that's an important life lesson.
That's it. It's those lessons that are behind sometimes. Like, they're not the on top lesson that the kids are getting from the book, but they're really important lessons that I think matter a lot more sometimes.
Totally. Even around the fact that we do school most days. It's like, no, it's consistency, and it's building the skill, and we do things that maybe we don't feel like doing sometimes because it is the right thing to do. Like,
I saw a wonderful quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson the other day, and because my kids are starting to get to that age where they're like, well, what's the point of this maths? And I mean, I loved maths. I was a 4-unit math nerd back in school, but I'll be honest, I don't think I've learned anything above maybe year 7 or 8 maths very often in my daily life since then. But he was saying that when kids ask that, sure, they might not use that math again, but they've wrestled with the problem and they've looked at ways to solve it. And then they've taken the steps to get there. And then they've checked those steps to see if they got to the right conclusion. And all of that mental work is practice for all the other decisions that they'll have to make and the other problems that they'll have in life. And it may not be solved in exactly the same way as a fancy algebraic equation or some calculus or something, but it is still that same process of working through a problem and breaking down into the steps and getting there. And that is what is beneficial as you keep going through life. And and maths is a great way to practice that problem solving and that learning.
Yeah, I think with everything, right? I think we were reorganizing my son's wardrobe this week, and he's like, this doesn't fit here. And I was like, figure it out. And you did. He's like, I just have to stack the things. And I'm like, it's just, it's
and
great.
Then they'll get it so sorted, and you have to sit back and not say, this isn't going to last because you've only just fit everything in there. And as soon as your clothes are going to need to be washed and go back in, it's not going to fit. But they get to learn those lessons.
Exactly.
Not that I'm speaking from experience of myself.
No,
not at all.
All right. So tell me, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced? You mentioned with your son being more, what was it, visuals and auditory? And you've said that, and I actually think I have something similar, because I often will be like, hang on, I need to see it, I don't understand. So what are some of the challenges you've encountered, and how do you get around them?
Okay. So the different areas of challenges, one of them is, and I'll get to the specifics of my kids' ones, but I'll talk about some broader ones first.
Sure.
There's that a lot of the living books that are recommended can be dated, whether that's through the scientific information that's conveyed or the cultural attitudes perhaps that were appropriate 100 years ago, but not so much now. That can be one big obstacle to them. But those sorts of things, it will depend on what the book is and what the purpose of the story is. At med school, the first year, they tell students that half of what you learn this year is going to be obsolete by the time you graduate, whether it's the procedures for things, but we don't know what half, so you've got to learn it all. When we were kids, we learned Pluto was a planet, and that's now. So I try to get books that are up to date, but if there's one that may be a little bit older and some of the science isn't as exact anymore, I'll talk to them about that half-life of knowledge. And that learning is a journey, and that's a beautiful thing. And so whatever we think we know right now, we've got to be humble about it and be prepared to that it may not be 100% correct. We might learn more about these things and get a better understanding that's slightly different. And so just to be that learning is a constant journey. We have never arrived at a destination, and unless it's something like 1 + 1, there's a good chance that things will change slightly over time as we learn more. I think we had molecules and atoms and electrons. You know, the electron is the smallest unit. Now they've discovered quarks and all the rest. And like so much of what we learned in science is obsolete now. So just reinforcing to our kids that it's that journey, and then you can research them if they're really interested in racial type things. I'll be able to talk to my kids about the attitudes that were held and the way that different groups were treated, and we can talk about the way that is still affecting things today. Like when a whole culture has been built on some negative stereotypes and ways of viewing other groups of people, that damage lasts. And so we can talk about that kind of thing. If it's, I try to rephrase literature sometimes. It was quite common, you know, if you had a black cow to name it the N-word, say. And so there's Tiger in the Bush, which won Australian Children's Book of the Year. I republished that, and I was like, no, we're changing the name there. We can just delete that little bit, because the point of the book isn't to show what life was like there. It's to explore other areas, and so that's not necessary. So those sorts of things you have to deal on a case-by-case basis. The other problems is when your kids have different learning profiles and what they like to do, in which case, again, know why you're reading or doing any particular book or any particular subject and what you want your kids to get from it. You can easily do things that will tick off the curriculum outcomes. I'm in New South Wales, so we need to make sure we can hit all of those outcomes and do our reporting at the end. But if I know what I'm wanting my kids to learn, say my middle son has trouble understanding, we can force through with a difficult book, but he's not going to take any of it in. So while we could tick those boxes and say, hey, this is what we did with him, what was the point? Like, we've wasted his time, we've wasted our time. So I will find something else that will still help him learn whatever it is we're trying to get from that resource. It may not be as in-depth and it may not be as detailed, but if he wasn't going to take in the other anyway, well, we're much better off giving him some understanding that then he can build on with his other stuff if he needs to, than him to have no understanding at all and get down on himself feeling that he's a failure or whatever else.
How do you link it to the curriculum if you've got to do all that reporting? Because in Victoria, we've got it really easy. We just get an email going, are you still homeschooling? You go, yes. And that's it.
I had someone here the other day and they were saying that they're going to find a friend in Victoria and just tell the government that they live there. And so that they
literally, I got an email that I had to press the link in the email and that was done. I'm like, okay, cool.
For me, we've never had an issue. I think I keep in mind that the person who's coming to check it isn't trying to be difficult. They just need to be able to tell their supervisors that we know the outcomes that are there and we have a plan to accomplish the outcomes. So I'll just get a Word doc, I'll copy and paste all of the outcomes on it. And then underneath it, I'll just write a sentence or two about the resources we have that will help to accomplish this and what I plan to do. And then at the end, when it's time to do the reporting, I'll just take that document, delete what I'd said I was planning to do, write what we have done, and just making it easy for them to tick their boxes and say, yes, they have done what they were meant to. So I think when you keep that in mind, you get there's one gentleman that comes and he will always part with a suggestion. And even if the next time you do it exactly the way he said, he'll have a different suggestion for you the next time. And some people get really challenged by that and triggered a little bit and feel insecure about it. Whereas I just smile and I'd go, hey, thank you so much for that. I will keep that in mind and see what I can do. And then you can forget it. They just feel they have to give their little piece. So it's
So someone actually comes out, Anthony.
Yeah, so they actually come out and they'll sit down with you.
Wow.
They want to meet the kids and they'll have a look at the resources that you've got and they'll flick through your plan. I had a lady saying that someone read every single line the other day, which would be a bit terrifying. I've only ever had them flick through. Yep, you've got the outcomes. Yep, you've got some plans. I always put the resources I've got in bold. And so as soon as they read that the resources are in bold, as they flick through, they can just see lots of bold bits. They're like, oh, yes, he's got lots of resources.
Wow.
And then they do that, yeah.
Just take them to your office. Be like, see?
That's it, exactly. That's it. Downstairs, I've got a bookcase that's 5.5 meters tall and 4 meters wide with ready for the rolling ladder. And so I just take them and show them that and go, yeah, there's the history books, there's the geography.
Holy moly.
And they usually get so distracted by the bookcase that they forget to look too closely at some of the other things.
Yeah, like what is it, like Beauty and the Beast? Is that like the vibe?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The boys are old enough. I can build my rolling ladder now. I can't wait.
You'll have to send me a photo. I can't wait to see. I think that was like my generation, every girl's dream. It's like, oh, the bookshelf.
Yes. Yep.
One day, maybe. So what about when we're traveling and we're on the road? What do you go electronic? Do you just take a couple of books? How do you approach travel
Again, it depends on what we're doing on our trip. We have a camper trailer, so we try to spend 2 months a year traveling about, seeing different things. It can be difficult to get away from the farm for too much longer, but fingers crossed we get to do the big lap in 26. We're trying to start planning that. So when we were heading, so my oldest wanted to wake up underground in Coafield for his 13th birthday. And so we were like, yep, fantastic. So we went down and did the Great Ocean Road and up to Coafield and all that kind of thing. So doing that, I got him to read Colin Tierley's Fire in the Stone, so he could have a bit of an understanding about life in the opal fields. And Mavis Thorpe Clarke has a great book called The Min Min, about some children growing up in one of those little towns where the train only comes through every couple of weeks to bring supplies.
How do you find the books? Is this a Google search or are you just in the
know?
I'm
just so lucky. I'll put together a sheet for you guys that you'll be able to have a link to, and it'll have some links to different places with resources and Facebook groups where you can ask questions, and these mums who've got ridiculously huge libraries and have read so many books can make wonderful suggestions.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you. I just
no, that's great.
What opal feels like? How do I even where do you start?
So for me, for that trip, there was those sorts of things that I wanted him to have an understanding of as we were doing it. So if we've got days with lots of driving, we'll have some of those things, but and if you're traveling for a year, 6 months, you're going to need to do a little bit of stuff, most likely, to be able to tick the boxes that the government wants you to. But on a lot of our short trips, we'll just be talking about things. I'll have the Wiki Camps app up and have the places of interest. And we were going through Wellington. I'm like, the site of the last recorded gun duel in Australia is just off on that side street. So we take a little detour, and then you go to the plaque that's commemorating the gun duel and talk about what life was like in those days where you had your muskets and would stand back to back and fork off. And the doctor and the other gentleman didn't manage to hit each other too much. They were both drunk, and they decided that they'd leave it be and went on their merry way.
Perfect. But probably best.
That's it. But I just try to find fascinating things like that as we're traveling around for them, because the amount that they learn as they're getting to meet different people and view different places. I get them to keep a diary or a journal as we're going about with what's happening and what they see. And there's no right or wrong thing that they write in there if it's what's interesting to them and what they've taken from it. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So for longer trips, if we're just going someplace and we're going to be doing some fossicking for a week, we went down out near Oberon, which is near Jenolan Caves, and camped for a week and did some fossicking, trying to find some sapphires and gold and stuff. And because we were just doing that for a few hours and then chilling out at camp, they had their school books to be able to have a read of when we were just doing nothing.
And
it just depends.
Is there e-versions of do you offer like electronic
Yeah.
versions of
So
books on
anything
Living Book
that I have
Press?
anything I have the rights to offer, I do a PDF or an EPUB version of it, just because I think that's so much easier for people if they are traveling. And
So
anybody who
good.
buys a physical copy of the book, if it's not some digital books, I have to pay a royalty per copy. And so I can't include those for free when you buy the physical. But if I don't have to pay a per copy royalty, I include the digital copy for free with the physical. So that way you can maintain your schooling just pulling up the digital as you go.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, because we're traveling for 6 months next year and my daughter loves to read. So I was like, okay, we actually need to buy an iPad now. Like,
Yes,
so that
that's it.
we can like get
You can
you.
load it up with good books and
Seriously, I'm like, we're going to want to, and I'm going to want to read. So I'm like, okay,
Yep.
we got the iPad this week.
Excellent.
Preparing.
Yeah.
So good to know. I'll have to go shopping.
No
All right.
worry.
Is there anything else that we missed, Anthony? Anything else that you think that is really useful or helpful or that you wanted to say?
I think living books can be quite an intimidating way to start doing stuff with your kids because it's so different to what we're used to, where you've got the textbook style of things. And I'll be honest, we start of last year, we got them the Excel books or whatever it was, and for English and maths and HSIE or whatever it was, and just got them to go through a few of the chapters, just as that reassurance that, you know, if I get hit by a bus and they have to go to school, they're not going to be struggling to catch up on top of everything else. And that was wonderful for me because it did reassure me that, yes, they are learning really well and they can do all of this stuff. But a living book is so different to having those textbooks, and you're not getting that concrete, you know, they read this, they answered the specific questions that were there, you checked them against the answer sheet. You're not getting that instant reinforcement that what you're doing is right. So it can be difficult. But I just urge you, if you would like to start trying these things, just pick one subject that you're wanting to give it a shot on and start reading a book together with your kids and introduce these things slowly. There was a mum in New Zealand who used to be a teacher, and she's wrote a few courses. There's Successful Homeschooling Made Easy and Successful Charlotte Mason Made Easy. And she went through, and that was originally an email course that you'd be sent each month and you had your activities to do. And I worked with her to turn those into books just to make it a lot easier. And I found for me, that was really reassuring, especially with our chaos that happens sometimes or everything but the basics all, you know, fall apart. And just, okay, no, that's all right. Just add one subject at a time, get your routine going again, and then add something else. And I found them just like a warm hug as you're doing things, just that reassurance that, yep, things will fall apart, but it's all right. And you can put it back together just as you do one subject at a time.
And I think they learn more than we think. I think for me,
Absolutely.
it's like, yeah, like when we travel, they do maths and they keep a journal, and that's kind of it. And then the rest is like, oh, we're going to this site and we learn about that, and they watch videos about that, and they're exploring. But it's like maths is the only one. I'm like, okay, and you're continuously writing, so great. And then whatever else is just whatever else is in front of us.
They learn so much more because, I mean, you'll visit, say, the Pink Lakes in South Australia, and so then you're learning about the salt building up and you know, you're covering evaporation, you're covering the water cycle, you're covering so much with just that kind of thing. And so I think just traveling in general is so invaluable for what they learn. It's well worth it. So you don't need to do a lot. I try to just use the books, like I said, like to supplement something that they're particularly excited about going and seeing, to give them that deeper understanding and appreciation of what it'll be.
Yeah, I think definitely that learning. Otherwise, they just go there and like, oh yeah, looks pretty cool, but they have no appreciation of the context of the history of it or anything. So yeah, thank you so much, Anthony.
My absolute pleasure. And anybody who has any questions or there's anything I can help with, my website's livingbookpress.com. Just reach out, send me a note. And I'm just a homeschooler like you guys, trying to make using these books a little bit easier. So I probably won't have all the answers, but I can help you find someone who will, because I've got a lot of contacts in the group.
Yeah, and we would love that resource sheet if you're willing to share, and we'll pop that in the group as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you again for all you're doing to support us all to make it all easier, because it's, teamwork.
There's so many decisions and difficult things that we're doing. So anything that can be a bit easier is wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you very much.